Welcome to Where the Ram Bends. I'm Bryce.
And I'm Summer.
Today we have Jawanda Mast of the National Down Syndrome Congress. Welcome to Where the Ram Bends. Could you briefly introduce yourself for our listeners?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys. I don't do anything too briefly, as Summer probably knows, but I'll try. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here today. I believe our personal stories are so important. And I'm going to talk some about professional, but my personal and professional kind of mix. I work for the National Down Syndrome Congress as the grassroots advocacy manager. And so I work with families all over the country and help advocates learn how to tell their stories and use their stories to impact policy change with elected officials and decision makers. The way I got involved in this was when my daughter Rachel was born almost 27 years ago. She's be 27 on June 13th when she was born with Down syndrome. And I did have a prenatal diagnosis by choice, and that really did help me to be more prepared when she came. And the world was very different then than it is now. You kind of barely had the internet. I think that's hard for people to understand. But we were very fortunate. We lived in Memphis, Tennessee at the time. And we had a great early intervention program where my daughter got off to a really good start. We also, in our early intervention program, one section of that was that when our children turned 2, we had parent support. We're in parent support groups while our children sometimes rotated through some therapies or different preschool type activities. But when they turned 2, we started working on learning special education law. And our parent training and information center did those trainings for us. And I really loved learning that. I've always kind of liked policy and I had done some advocacy. So people often ask me how I know special education law, and it's because of what I learned when my daughter was very young. And I've used it a lot across her lifetime. Rachel did start school there in Memphis, Tennessee. It was challenging. But, we advocated, and Rachel was able to be included in the gen ed classroom across her educational experience. We moved to Kansas when my daughter was 9, so we've lived here for 17 years. So I tell people no one else in Kansas sounds as good as I do, okay? Because no one else in Kansas has this delightful Southern accent, which actually is a good thing sometimes because when you call a legislative office, well, that's good or bad. They know who you are when they hear your accent because they know you're not from Kansas if it's a Kansas legislator. But one of the things that I like to say is, I'm really at the end of the day just a mom. There is nothing special about me. I am just a mom who happens to know how to tell a story, and I am persistent and I don't give up. We moved to Kansas, as I said, when my daughter was 9, and we do not have money. We're not rich. We don't have political connections. But I use those things that I do know. I know how to tell a story, and I could call a legislative office and get in and tell that story. And we built relationships over the years with our senators and representatives. And when one gets voted out or retires, we just build a relationship with the next one. I have worked on a lot of legislation on the state level, including seclusion and restraint, which was one of the hardest things I've ever worked on. We helped to pass the Federal ABLE Act, and then my daughter went on to be able to open the first ABLE account here in the state of Kansas, and we just truly consider it a privilege and honor to be able to advocate. So I just got going and just went on and on there. So
No, I think that's perfect. Can you tell us a little bit about when you received your daughter's diagnosis, when you found out that she was going to have Down syndrome? And then kind of tell us, like, is that when your advocacy journey started or how that kind of began?
well, that wasn't really about advocacy at that time. As I said, I had a prenatal diagnosis by choice. I'm a control freak. and I was gonna be older when my daughter was born, and so my doctor and I talked, and that's what I wanted to do. 27 years ago, which was, life was different, not as different as it was 50 or 60 years ago, of course, but you did not have social media, which good or bad. There's good and bad about that, especially in a disability climate. But, when I got my prenatal diagnosis, I knew a couple of things about Down syndrome, and none of them were really good. I remember, and I'm just going to use some words that it's what I knew then. I knew when I was growing up, there were some people with Down syndrome in our larger community. Of course, none of them went to school with us. I grew up in a really small community in Arkansas, and they were called mongoloids. I don't know why I remembered that, but I did. For some reason, remembered from a biology class somewhere along the way that people with Down syndrome could have a problem, but I didn't know anything about that. And then the other thing I knew is that most of the time they would have some cognitive delays. So what I knew was not very good, but, I've told people before you would think I was crazy sometimes when you hear this, but we got our diagnosis. My husband had cancer at the same time we got our diagnosis. He had colorectal cancer at the age of 34. So we had a lot going on there. So he had a tumor removed on a Thursday, and on Friday night, my doctor called me at home to tell me Rachel's diagnosis. And, it was really a blessing. The doctor we had, he knew what was going on with our family because his stepdaughter was one of my close friends. So he actually held on to my results of my amnio a couple of days until we got my husband through his surgery and that removal. And he is cancer free, and we're blessed now. But that weekend was really, really hard. There was not much, there wasn't much. We had computers, you had the internet, but there wasn't much there. And I found a group that had what they called then a listserv and was able to get in there and communicate with someone. But you know what? That Monday, we went and saw our doctor. He had me come in that day to go over some things, and I went home and went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror and said, "You know what? It's time to get over your pity party. You did not get this prenatal diagnosis so you could, walk into a cave for the rest of your pregnancy. You did this so you could be prepared. And it's going to be your job now to help this little girl grow up to become a productive, contributing, grow up to become whoever she wants to be and to be valued in society." And that's what I set out to do. Now, I am not saying there weren't some more pity parties. There were. And not everybody is me. So not everybody is gonna be able to do that, and I recognize that, but that's just where my personality kicked in, so I got to it.
I love that. It sounds a little bit like my story. I kinda laid in bed for a few days, and then I was like, "No, I'm gonna do everything I can to be the best mom to Julia as possible." Um, so you got the diagnosis and you decided you're gonna be the best parent possible, and you got connected. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got connected with early intervention and what your experience was with early intervention?
I can, and we had an amazing early intervention program. My doctor, my OBGYN, and there weren't a lot of classes on best practices back then for doctors. There were some, but not a lot. The best thing with my doctor was he knew me personally and he handled our situation personally. So he did a great job. It's the fear that you have of what you don't know about, the Down syndrome and all those things, and that you see, our vision is what we've been exposed to, right? And, Life Goes On, which was a pretty good show, but that was kind of, that's kind of all you knew. And if you looked it up on the internet, you just saw horrible, photography and heard all these, horrible things that may or may not be true. But as it so happened, it wasn't actually my doctor that connected me with the early intervention program, though he did immediately offer to connect me to another family who had a child with Down syndrome. And that family had been through early intervention and stuff, and we did connect later. But I was working at a place called Youth Villages. I was the volunteer manager there, and we served young people at the time, we would say, who were emotionally disturbed. We had foster care. We had a lot of really hard kids that had been through a lot of hard things, and I managed the volunteers for our fundraising events and one-on-one mentors and that kind of thing. Two of the ladies that I worked with knew about this place called Special Kids and Families that did early intervention, and they told me about it. And they got the information and gave it to me and told me who to call. So I called them and we talked, and they kind of walked me through, what we would need to do next and how we would get signed up. And that's what we did. They also took me to visit some other places, and they truly, the people I worked with, but then our friends in Memphis and our church truly embraced us. They surrounded, and again, my husband was going through cancer at this time, y'all. So, they truly embraced and supported us, and it made all the difference. Our early intervention program that we chose because Rachel was an only child, and we wanted to do an early intervention program where we were actually going to be with other families. And I'm pretty much an open book, and I like having people in my home, but I wanted Rachel to have that interaction, and I wanted to get to know those other parents. So, um, the first day that we went, Rachel was like 10 days old, and we were just kinda there for an introductory meeting, and at the same time we were there, there was another lady there named Becky who had a son named Ben. And y'all are gonna think this is the craziest thing, but honestly, and I'm a person of faith, and I'd been praying, God, would you please bring me a friend that has a child with a disability? Because I recognized that I needed that. I needed someone. And then I even said, little cherry on top, and God, if they could have a child with Down syndrome, that would be even better. Well, so this lady had a little boy named Ben that had Down syndrome. He was a week older than Rachel. They're 12 days apart. Well, that was a fortuitous moment that we happened to be there at the same time because I called the contact at Ruth was her name, at Early Intervention and said, I don't know if you can do this, but I would really like to reach out to the lady that was there, that had the little boy close to Rachel's age. And, I'm hoping we can be friends. And she said, well, she just called me and wants your number. So anyhow, we got each other's numbers. We lived less than 10 minutes from each other. And even though I have not lived in Memphis, Tennessee in 17 years, I talked to her earlier this week. We talk on the phone every week. We're still very close. Um, I mean, we say that we're more like family than friends. That's the kind of relationship we have. We also laugh though and say we should write books about what we've gone through. And we say, we could just make up stories because the stuff we tell that's true sounds like fiction because, all these things you go through on this journey are just so funny. But anyhow, early intervention was great. We were very fortunate. Rachel was able to get speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Rachel didn't need a lot of physical therapy, but she needed a lot of occupational therapy and speech therapy. And then we did some cognitive stuff. We did have some stuff in our home in addition to that, but we started out in groups with other children, and getting to know those other families was amazing. And, just really can't say enough about how important it is to connect to other families.
That's amazing. I love that because that's a big struggle is getting connected to other families for a lot of people. So I love that. I don't know that our early intervention does anything like that. It's pretty much just parent and child, but I love that idea. That's great.
Again, to Summer's point, the caveat here is that there's not enough information being spread to those families to let them know that these resources exist.
And there are so many resources out there I can't speak to the specifics of every disability, but like in the Down syndrome community, there's been so many resources put together that are free to hospitals where all these babies are born, to pediatricians where these babies, hopefully go. To that point, if you haven't been caught for early intervention when they go to school, somebody should have this information. I'm sure this goes on in, cross disability, but there are baskets. You don't have a Down syndrome group in your community? Well, there's organizations that have baskets that they will get to you for free to get to these families. So,
Yeah.
and while it has improved, I will say hospitals have sometimes been a barrier by not, and doctors' offices. That I think that's improved. Definitely across Rachel's lifetime, that's improved, and we were fortunate to have the doctor we had, and our pediatrician knew about Down syndrome and disability and blah blah. But it's been hard sometimes to get this information into the right hands in hospitals and in doctor's office to get it distributed to families. And then they'll
Yeah.
give you something that's, outdated. And, we all just got to do better on stuff like that.
So, Jawanda, at what point did you realize that you were gonna need to advocate on more of a legislative level as
Well,
well?
let's talk about school. I think many, and probably most of the advocates I work with, especially in my National Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition, um, I'm gonna step out there. I haven't done a survey, but I would say most probably got interested in advocacy and legislative because of school issues. And even though I enjoyed policy and wanted to learn, that would be, kind of what was my turning point's probably too strong, but I went to a conference when Rachel was 2 that I say changed my life, and I think in turn probably changed, I hope, across time has changed a lot of lives. And at that conference, I heard Mike Remus, who you all may not know who he is. I called him a hired special education hired gun. And at the time, he was special education director in Williamson County, Tennessee, which was just south of Nashville. And he turned that school district in like a year into pretty much a fully inclusive school district at the time. And I heard him speak, and it was life changing to me because we had been, learning how our children had a right to free and appropriate public education and that they should be treated like other children and blah, blah, blah. But he had a child with a disability, he had been an administrator, he'd been a teacher, and he was very eloquent and charismatic, and, I grabbed onto that. At that same conference, though, I heard 2 young women who had Down syndrome speak. One is Karen Gaffney, who's fairly well known. At the time, she was known for being the first woman to swim the English Channel who had Down syndrome, which I can't imagine anybody swimming the English Channel with or without Down syndrome. But anyhow, she was very well spoken and had gone to a school in Oregon where she was fully included. I think Oregon, I may be wrong on that. But I heard her talk and I'm like, Rachel's too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here is a role model. Rachel's going to need mentors. I want to know more from her. So, boy, I made a beeline to her when she stopped speaking and talked to her parents and said, my daughter is 2. You are such a great role model for her. And her parents said, inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. Do not let them put your daughter in a separate classroom because she will miss out, blah, 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 blah. There was another speaker, her name was Fiona Hawkes, who also has Down syndrome. And she's not as well known, doesn't do as much of the public speaking circuit, but she worked for a utility company and could also drive, which 25 years ago, that was really a big thing. But she had a British accent too, so I loved that. But she also lived there, and I heard her, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, another role model for my daughter." I want to, and I went to her, and guess what? Parents said the same thing, inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. So I bought it hook, line, and sinker at that point, right? And then I started learning about the time Rachel was born that there were a lot of struggles where we lived to get your children included. And this was very true. In fact, we ended up putting Rachel in a private preschool. Um, we tried the public school preschool program, which was not inclusive, and that's kind of when I got started advocating, because we started advocating that she should have access to a that she should have access to typical peers in preschool, and that kindergarten students aren't typical peers for a 3-year-old. So we started advocating for that, made a little bit of headway, but we were not pleased, with the preschool program at the public school, so we enrolled her in a private preschool. Now, here's an important point, though. Private schools do or private preschools or schools do not have to take students with disabilities, as we all know. And, many preschools, if you are not potty trained, you cannot, go to their preschool if they're private. And, I feel like sometimes that is used to keep children with disabilities. I know that's really cynical of me, but sometimes I believe that's used to keep students with disabilities out of preschool. And Rachel was potty trained, which is not necessarily who knew I'd be talking about potty training, 27 years later. But anyhow, um, she was potty trained, and that wasn't it. We ended up finding a great preschool where she could go, and they were great, and her teachers were great. Her, preschool teacher came to her kindergarten IEP meeting, and, they go through all this stuff, and she said they were moving on to the next section, and she said, "Well, can I speak? I think I have some things I would like to share about Rachel that I think y'all missed." And she started talking about everything she and the other students had learned from Rachel.
Oh,
And,
wow.
she started crying, and it was really beautiful, but that's when, I really got more interested and really tried to learn more about what was going on in Tennessee and going to conferences to learn, like the NDSS, National Down Syndrome Society, also had a conference then, and the National Down Syndrome Congress. We've, gone to many, not all, but since Rachel was born, but many of their conferences. But I started trying to go to anything and learn anything that I could. When she was 5, I, went through Partners in Policy Making in Tennessee, and I love Partners in Policy Making. It's a great program, but that's kinda where I jumped in on all of this. When Rachel was 2, I did take her to a town hall meeting for our congressman. We were emailing him or writing letters back then, about some funding issues for our early intervention program, and a lot of people said it was a state issue, but it really was kind of a federal issue. Anyhow, I took her to this, town hall meeting because I thought if I have a 2-year-old with me, they're probably gonna call on me to answer a question because they're gonna want me to get out of there because 'cause they're gonna be afraid my daughter's gonna start crying. I know manipulation at its best. And guess what? They called on me first. We stayed the whole time though because Rachel was fine. And we established a really good relationship with him. But I really started doing a lot of work on the state level on, working to help make our school system be more inclusive where we live, so.
Well, so you started working on the state level and inclusion in the schools. What was kind of your next step then on the advocacy level?
Well, while we were still in Tennessee, I met Madeline Will, who is a former, she's the former OSER secretary, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services with the U.S. Department of Education, but she came to Nashville. At the same time this is all going on, we're trying to build a Down syndrome group in Memphis. We had kind of a shell of a group that had gotten started, and these families used the Buddy Walk, which started like 28 years ago to start rebuilding. They'd had a Down syndrome group that actually became the early intervention program there when legislation was passed that required early intervention services to be offered. So the Down syndrome group kind of went away at the time. And not long before we got in the Down syndrome community, they had tried to reestablish the organization and were trying to grow it and using the Buddy Walk as a means to do that. And so we got involved with that, and I have a background in volunteer management and some fundraising, community education, but I kind of had that skill set for how to help grow some of that, and just had the great honor and privilege of being able to lead and work with that organization to build it. And I worked myself into being the first paid executive director of the Down Syndrome Association of Memphis and the Mid South. And we had a great group there, and I still miss all those people in Memphis. But I started working with the director of the Middle Tennessee group. Her name was Sheila Moore, who she may have retired, but she moved over to the ARC. She had a son with Down syndrome. But they had their Down Syndrome Association was really up and going, and we started working on some things together. And she knew I enjoyed advocacy. So Madeline Will came in and we worked together, and our two groups put in bigger chunks of money because we had more money. But we worked with all the groups across Tennessee to start what they called then a GAC, Government Affairs Committee. Isn't that an awful name?
That's
But anyhow, they were trying to establish those in states, and we were able to do that there in Tennessee and just start doing some things together. At that same time is when I learned about the ABLE Act. That was not the ABLE Act then. It was in a different committee, and it was, I can't even remember the name of it, but before Rachel was even born, I'd been told about this $2,000 asset limit, and I thought, "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Why would you put a $2,000 asset limit on people with disabilities?" So I thought, "Well, that can't be right." Well, of course, I learned that is right, and if it sounds crazy, it probably is for legislation, for people with disabilities. But Madeline had been working on with some people on, what would go on to become the ABLE Act, but, um, so I got to know her and started working on this. Well, about that time is when a couple of years after that is when we moved to Kansas. And so when we moved here, I got to connected to some different people and who were on the national level. And I started working on getting our Kansas senators and representatives interested in the ABLE Act. And when Rachel was 12, I think, we took her to Washington, D.C., and she is quite the little advocate in her own right. And she went with me to all these offices, and we would go visit them in their home offices and get to know their staff. Getting to know staff, key to getting legislation passed. But we just started going and telling our personal story. And I don't remember, it was the first time we were in Senator Moran's office. Rachel was talking about, she had her little script about what she was going to say. She had her one pager, all things that we encourage people to do when they're doing advocacy. And we're getting ready to leave the meeting, and she turns around and whips her head around and looks at him and says, "Senator Moran, you need to sponsor the ABLE Act because I want to get married and live in a pink house." Well, everybody in the room just cracked up, but it stuck. And I realized before that, I've got another story about when I realized that Rachel was going to be a good advocate, but that became a symbol of the ABLE Act for people across the country. Rachel's pink house. That still sticks with her, in fact. People still send us pictures of pink houses. Her social media tags are Rachel's pink house. But it was that personal connection that made the difference. But that's where I really got started on federal legislative stuff, was because of the ABLE legislation.
Can I just point out real quick, though, the observation, and this is something that I've said whenever I applied for partners in policymaking, I told Brad Mays in my interview, I said, I want to learn to be the best advocate possible because I'm going to be my daughter's role model for her to learn to be her best advocate. So I just want to take a chance to point out the fact that as you were becoming an amazing advocate, you were teaching Rachel to how to advocate for herself and how important it is for parents to learn this because people with disabilities don't get the choice
Mm.
of whether or not to be an
Absolutely.
advocate, right? Like they they constantly have to advocate for themselves. So as parents, I feel like it's important for us to teach them to be the best, to learn how to.
Also to your
So I just wanted
also
to
to your point, Summer, talking about, Rachel wanting to get married and live in a pink house. Unfortunately, in society, when you live with a disability, there's often ramifications that, and penalties for people with disabilities to get married. They can lose their, benefits and stuff like that. So it's almost like they get put in society into a box. Everybody gets put in the same box. And unfortunately, it's our job as advocates to get us away from the box. Like I've said just summer, and the reason why I signed up for this podcast was I want to show people that just because you have cerebral palsy does not mean that you cannot have the career that you want to have. I said in Partners in Policymaking, and Summer says this all the time, that this is what stuck in her mind, that I said that if I wasn't diagnosed with cerebral palsy with all the degrees and life coaching certifications that I have, I would already be making six figures as a public speaker. But since I live with cerebral palsy, I don't get to do that because people don't see me, they see the disability. And as an advocate, that infuriates me because we have made so many strides as a community, but I feel like we always take steps back. So my question for you, Jawanda, would be when you got into the national advocacy space, what was a point where you felt like, am I doing this? Am I doing this correctly? Were there ever nights of like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. Maybe I shouldn't step into where the big boys or the big girls play. Uh, am I in over my head?
I want to go back and tell y'all something. I'm going to answer that in a second to Summer's point about the modeling. Um, when Rachel was 6, she may have been 5, I'm pretty sure she was 6. We'd gone to the state capitol and we went into an office that was not our state representative, it was someone else. And Rachel, little bitty thing, walked around me, ahead of me, stuck her hand out to this legislator who I didn't know, and said, "Hi, I'm Rachel, and I am included in the general education classroom."
Oh,
Wow.
Well,
wow.
I had not taught her to do that, y'all. And that's when I knew I was in trouble, that
Oh,
she
I
was gonna
love it.
soak all of this in, and she does. She soaks it all in, and I talk a lot in training about giving self-advocates with in the Down syndrome community, our advocates want to be called self-advocates. And, I talk a lot about making sure self-advocates use their voices, and I am not necessarily talking about a physical voice. A voice is communicating in whatever way you
Yes,
need
ma'am.
to or
Yes,
can
ma'am.
what you want and what you need. And we need to help people find their parents too, but we need to help people find their voices early. And that modeling Summer that you're talking about. Bryce, to your point, pretty much every day I go, "Oh my gosh, what am I doing here and what do we do?" And that's not necessarily a lie, but there are times I will tell you after Rachel's kindergarten IEP meeting is probably I knew the law and I knew Rachel, and we walked out. And I mean, we pretty much drew a line in the sand. We had a 5.5 hour IEP meeting, and we said 13 times, we know our child best. And the law says she should be in the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment for her is the gen ed classroom, and that's what we want. 13 times when we finally got it, and there's more to that story. But when I left, I remember going, "Oh my, I really hope I know what I'm doing." Because I was in a school where my daughter, there wasn't a lot of history or proof that they knew how to include someone.
Mhm.
And, I just honestly prayed for the best, and my husband and we've
Oh,
done that
no.
all along this path, and my husband often says he wishes that we could have a parallel universe where we could have the path that everybody else tried to push us on and the path that we have taken to see what the difference would be, because we believe the fact that Rachel has been included in church, community, and school is why she is who she is today. But back to Bryce's point about some of this legislation, all the things Bryce talked about, marriage penalties, housing issues, Bryce, Rachel, Summer's child, they all can access the things that typical people in our society can access, but they need a little more help and a little more support to do that sometimes. And we all need help and support. It's just that mine and Summer's needs are going to be very different. Rachel and Bryce's needs are going to be different, but we always have to be looking for ways to advocate for people to be able to live their best life, to live their dreams. So there are a lot of days that I wonder, how we're gonna navigate things, but I truly believe we just have to keep on keeping on. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your role with the National Down Syndrome Congress and a little bit what you do with them and your advocacy training.
well, I say I'm the PR girl. I have a funny story about that when we were passing Abel, but anyhow, um, I love people and I love stories, and I am a true believer that our personal stories make all the difference. um, in policy work and advocacy work and anything we do. I think if we can learn to tell our stories, and tell them with passion, that we can make a difference. And IEP meetings are kind of that.
Mhm.
We always wanted people to come along with our shared high expectations, and more often than not, we got that. Yeah, there were a few that didn't come along the way, but I can tell you, Rachel's got a whole posse of people that are friends of Rachel and will be with us forever. And many that have thanked us for bringing them on this journey, who are educators or whatever. But I'm very fortunate that I have been able to use my passion for storytelling and people
Yes.
to help engage others in becoming advocates. And that's pretty much what I do at NDSC. As I said, I'm the grassroots advocacy manager. I also am the former grassroots advocacy manager for the National Down Syndrome Society, and then I've done some consulting on the side through the years. But 9 years ago, I've been involved with NDSC since Rachel was small, doing different things, as I mentioned. But 9 years ago, I was invited to be the coordinator for what is called Advocacy Training Boot Camp at the NDSC convention. And Heather Sachs, who is one of our NDSC policy and advocacy co directors, and I had worked together before. And we had also we worked on passing ABLE legislation together, even though she's in Maryland and I'm in Kansas, and we're also friends, but we'd done a lot of advocacy work together. And so she wanted me to be the coordinator of this advocacy training boot camp for NDSC. Our convention, as Summer knows, but for those who may not know, is held every summer, and they say it's the largest family reunion in the Down syndrome community, which is true. But we'll have thousands of people come to this convention every year to hear medical experts, education experts, advocacy experts, you name it, we got it. There's a track called Youth and Adult First Self Advocates. There's an educator conference. There's a sibling conference. There's all kinds of things. Well, Heather had this idea because we get all kinds of people that say, I may never be able to go to Washington, D.C., but and maybe I will, but I want to learn how to advocate. So Heather's idea was that we would do an advocacy training boot camp, and it's aimed at beginners, and it's like 1, 2, 3. This is what you do if you want to, if you want to become an advocate or strengthen your advocacy journey.
Okay,
So
thank
for
you.
9 years now, this will be our ninth
Okay.
one. And our convention is in a different location every year. This year it's in Orlando. And all of these little mini conventions and meetings will be going on at the same time. But at our advocacy training boot camp, we have self advocates, professionals, parent advocates, elected officials, and or staffers from elected officials' offices. We use skits. We overwhelm you with a ton of resources. But it's a 3.5 hour boot camp that's about 16 hours of training, and Summer's been, so she could probably confirm this. We squeeze 16 hours of training into 3.5 hours, basically, and then hopefully provide resources for people to be able to advocate when they get home. So that's a chunk of what I do. But that's where how I got started. I contracted with NDSC to do that. 4 years ago, they expanded the policy department, said we need someone with these great policy people, Heather Sachs, Stephanie Smith Lee, who's the former director of the Office of Special Education Programs, and she and Heather are policy and advocacy co-directors. And then Ricky Sabia, who's been on this podcast before, who is our K through 12 education expert. Well, they're in the weeds on policy, but they said we need someone to work at the grassroots level and help us bring our advocates up and coordinate our National Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition, which is 1,200 members across the country. And our Facebook and social media kind of be the liaison on communication. So that's what I do is I mean, we all work on everything, but I work to develop and train our grassroots advocates. We have people across the entire United States. Every state we have what we call NDAC members, and we have quarterly trainings. We have access to some things for our NDAC members that others may not have. One thing that I think is really cool is, and it always happens the week of convention, though, we will have an elected official, senator's office, reach out and say, "We've got this actually happened a couple of years ago, able age adjustment bill. We want to get that passed out of the finance committee, and we need some help. Can you reach out to your advocates because we know you have this strong grassroots advocacy network?" And they tell us, the states we need to do that in. And guess what? The week of convention, I carve out time and send an email to those people and they act. We got thanked for helping being an integral part of getting that bill out of that finance committee. That bill did go on to pass and has just been implemented, in fact. But so we will have legislative offices reach out to us on things like that. But the most important thing, I say the most important thing, there's so many important things. The most important thing about all of this is for advocates to work on learning how to reach out to elected officials, whether that is a school board member, a county commissioner, a state legislator, or a federal legislator, to learn how to reach out to them and learn how to use their personal story to help make change on policies that need change. I would like to give an example of something from our lives that I'm pretty proud of. When we moved here and Rachel got on the wait list here for the Medicaid waiver, she was 9, and we knew there would be a wait, and it was 8 years, and she did come up, in 2017, but we had this horrible assessment called the BASIS, and it's 13 categories of, behaviors, basically, that you're supposed to track 365 days a year. And, I've it's and we do it every year. Every year before that meeting, I say, "Well, I'm gonna be in a bad mood today because we are going to have our meeting where they decide if Rachel still has enough Down syndrome to qualify for her services." Which is funny and not funny, okay? And very frustrating, as anybody in the disability community knows, because Down syndrome doesn't go away, okay? So every year I'll be angry about it and I post about it. And when Rachel turned 18, before that, when we would do this assessment, that is very humiliating. It had things on it like smears feces on the wall, sexually inappropriate, just all kinds of things like that. And before she turned 18, her case manager, we have a great case manager, and I would say, "Rachel, you don't have to stay for this part of the meeting." And she always said, okay. She went to her IEP meeting. She didn't like to stay because she didn't want to miss out on class. Same thing with this. But when she turned 18, we did supported decision making and not guardianship. I'm not saying that's for everybody, but that's the choice our family made. And she's very proud that she can that she makes her own decisions, and she tells people that, and she knows the things she needs help with. Example, she needs help with finances. Money is very hard for her, and she knows that, and help her with that. But it was during COVID when we were doing this, and, it was a video, meeting for her basis assessment, and her case manager and I said, "Rachel, you might wanna get off now, and we'll do this. You don't have to sign for this." And she said, "No, this is about me, and I wanna stay on." Okay. So, that's her choice, right? Well, about halfway through this assessment was someone she didn't know. That year was a woman. The next year it was a man that she didn't know. Totally inappropriate for a
Yeah.
young woman like my daughter, who is 7 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than a typical female, to be talking to someone about personal hygiene that she doesn't even know, especially a man.
Yeah.
And this one was with a woman, but the tears started dripping down her face. Now, we finished the assessment, we finished the meeting, and the minute it was over, I grabbed her and I hugged her and I said, "Rachel, this is not you. This is just what we have to do to get your services." I think anybody listening to this would have to agree that that's humiliating. Well, because of the work we have done in this state and the relationships that we've made, we were both invited to do testimony, and I actually served on our, intellectual and developmental disabilities, HCBS, it's the longest title, HCBS IDD Modernization Task Force. Well, Rachel has a great job at the University of Kansas Health System, and we didn't want her to take off work, so she did video testimony. And, I'm her mom, but I can tell you there was not a peep in the room when they played her video testimony, because her video testimony did not go into depth on those things, but it talked about how it was humiliating, and, it made her feel like she was not very smart, and it was really compelling. And after the committee meeting, several, people in the room, who I've known for years, some I didn't, came up to me and said, we have never seen legislators has visibly impacted by testimony as they were by Rachel's testimony. And, guess what? We no longer have the basis as the evaluation assessment in the state of Kansas. And, that's a huge win for us, and we also got a community service waiver. Wasn't us, it was a lot of us together, but my
Right.
point is that personal story that you have, is what is going to make a difference. When a legislator, an elected official, and it's not gonna happen every time. I have plenty of times that it didn't work. And I bite my tongue and smile when I go into legislators' offices and thank them for what they do, even when they don't always do what I want them to do, because we got to find common ground where we can try to move forward, or we're never going to get anywhere. You have to be grateful for the wins and don't give up. Just keep on going.
Something that I quote you on a lot is I remember sitting in that advocacy boot camp and you saying, "Remember, no forever friends and no forever enemies," and to just approach legislators, and build that relationship. And I use that. And I say, "This is what Jawanda says." And so, um, but yeah, just remembering to keep on even though you it's decisions in the past have not been what you wanted, just to keep building those relationships and keeping that communication open is so important.
I'm gonna not name names on this, but I'm gonna tell you it's been a number of years ago now. Um, one of our elected officials had not voted the way we wanted him to do on something, and we'd done a lot of advocacy around it. Um, but I was interviewed. This was back when you had weekly newspapers, but there was also an online paper. I was interviewed for our Kansas City Star, Rachel and I both, and we talked about the specific issue. It was Medicaid. That Medicaid is not a political issue. Or should not be. It is a people issue, and it should be a bipartisan issue because we should all want to be improving things for people with disabilities. And I talked about that, and this appears on the front page of the paper, and the particular person who shall not be named had not voted the way I wanted that person to. His office reached out to me that day when that came out on the front page, and I didn't say anything bad about
Right.
anybody. Reached out to me that day and said that this particular legislator wondered if we could meet up and have appetizers. And we did, and we spent an hour and a half together. And we had a great conversation. His staff was there, but it was just he and I at this table. And we've got a great relationship to this day, friends with his family. But I said, we're going to agree to disagree on this. I don't agree with you. I think I'm right. But we're going to agree to disagree on this. But you know what? We got other places that we can agree on things. And that legislator did do a lot of good things for us. So you really do have to suck it up and just keep on moving.
Well, we're gonna kind of wrap it up, but Bryce, I'm gonna let you ask your final question, and then after that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give Jawanda a chance to um, share her final thoughts
This
too.
is a two-part question, and this is kind of a fan favorite question. And Summer, you know where I'm going with this. Jawanda, what do you want your legacy to be?
Oh my gosh. And I've listened to this before. I should have paid more attention. Um, I, you know what I say? I say my work is a labor of love and conviction. That's my hashtag. And I want my legacy to be that I did everything I could, not just for my daughter. Rachel's going to be okay, but there are a lot of people that aren't going to be okay if we all don't use our voices.
Amen.
And that's
Amen.
what I hope. So,
Okay, so the second part of this question, and we've had people get emotional on this, so if you get emotional on this part, feel free. What what do you want Rachel's legacy to be?
um, I want Rachel's legacy to be that she gets the lot to live the life she chooses, and that she gets to live in that pink house someday.
And it's because of conversations like this and collaborations like this that that pink house can become a reality instead of a dream. And when I say that, because a lot of the things that the disability community wants, they are a dream. But it's because of these conversations that those dreams become realities. And this is why Summer and I decided to do this collaboration, because we want to turn dreams into realities. And with these key collaborations with people like you and the National Down Syndrome Congress, we can start to do that.
Could not agree more.
Jawanda, what 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 would you say to parents listening today that just got that diagnosis and they want to become the best advocate possible for their child?
Somebody asked me a number of years ago to do a speech on what I would say 14 years later. Rachel was 14 at the time. And I did a speech and then I turned it into a blog. I have a blog that doesn't get much love anymore called The Sassy Southern Gal. It has a lot of really good information in it. It's mostly about our experiences in the disability community, but not all. Um, I would say, number one, congratulations that you're part of this journey. I would say to give yourself some grace that you don't have to do everything. I would say it's okay to have a pity party every now and then. We all need a good pity party every now and
Yes.
then, but don't
Amen.
stay stuck in it. And if you do stay stuck in it, go try get help because we don't need to stay stuck there. But this is hard. It can be
Mhm.
hard. I would say, well, social media is great, and I'm glad we have all these ways to connect on social media. Find people, real live people where you live. If you live in a smaller area, it doesn't have to be somebody that has cerebral palsy. If you have cerebral palsy, it doesn't have to be Down syndrome. Find somebody else that's walking this journey that you can learn from. Um, find ways to be normal's not the word I'm looking for, but find ways I say the most important thing I've learned from Rachel is to find joy in the journey, and she does. She's so much finds joy in the journey. But all throughout her life, if we want to go to the zoo and she's supposed to
Mhm.
have therapy, I mean, I didn't cancel the day of, but if it's going to be pretty this week, we're going to go to the zoo. We're not going to do therapy Thursday, and we let the therapist know just to be able to do the same things other people do so that I mean, that was really important to us. But what I would say is to start educating yourself. That's the most important thing you can do. Start connecting with the National Down Syndrome Congress or other reputable organizations that represent disability rights, disability actions. There's lots of things to choose from. Start educating yourself and start working on those personal stories that you're going to tell. And that was not a short answer to your short question.
No, that was perfect, that was perfect. And I wanna add that anybody in the Down syndrome any parents in the Down syndrome community, you've got to attend the Down Syndrome Congress Convention at least
Yes.
once. At least once. The wealth of knowledge is just incredible. And then while you're there, go to the advocacy boot camp because that will spur your advocacy journey, in a way that it's just unbelievable. So,
And
And
Joanna, we're
go ahead,
neighbors.
Bryce.
I'm in Oklahoma, you're in Kansas. We need to collaborate. We're neighbors, we're not you're about 2.5 hours away from me. So come on down here to Oklahoma, girl. We'll get things done here.
Well, I may be coming to Tulsa sometime soon, but we're still working on that. So,
I'm about an
um,
hour from Tulsa, so
okay, where are you at, Bryce?
I'm in Oklahoma City, but jump on the
Okay,
highway,
yeah.
we're about an hour from Tulsa.
Yeah, we have friends there. My husband and I both went to school in Fayetteville, University of Arkansas, and back
Okay,
then, Tulsa was the closest city that you could go to. So
right.
we were in graduate school at the same time, but not undergraduate school. But hey, one other little plug I'd like to give: our National Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition is our grassroots network. You can go to our website, ndsccenter.org policy and advocacy and find FAQs and an online application. You do not have to be part of the Down syndrome community to join that. And it is for anyone of all abilities, self advocates, any disability, parents, professionals, whoever. And certainly, we advocate for things for people with Down syndrome, but we advocate for important policies for the entire
Yes,
disability community,
I love
and it
that.
is a great way easy way to plug in, so
I love
yes.
that.
Yes. Um, well, I just wanna thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and can't wait to share it with others. And we are going to put all the links to everything that we referenced to in the description of this podcast. So anybody can just go find it there and make it a little bit easier for them.
Yes.
So, Bryce, you ready to sign us off?
Yes, we are. And for today's episode, we're about out of time for Where the Ramp Ends. I'm Bryce,
I'm Summer.
and this is Where the Ramp Ends and Where Your Journey Begins. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Those small actions make a big difference in helping others discover our podcast. We believe these conversations matter. By sharing stories, experiences, and perspectives from the disability community, we hope to increase awareness, understanding, and inclusion for people with disabilities and their families. Your support helps us continue this work and reach more listeners who need these conversations. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.